Welcome to BDO's Legal Tech Talk podcast. We're joined by judges and legal professionals to discuss emerging trends, regulatory updates, and the latest headlines. We'll provide tips to help your law firms and legal departments make the most out of legal technology. I'm Daniel Gold, BDO Principal and eDiscovery Managed Services Leader.
And I'm Eric Dirk, BDO's Managing Director of Legal Operations. Let's get started with this episode's exciting discussion.
And welcome back to another episode of BDO's Legal Tech Talk podcast. And today we are very fortunate to be joined by Cynthia Cole. Cynthia is a partner and global chair of commercial technology and transactions at Baker McKenzie. And Eric, the reason why I am so thrilled to have Cynthia join us here in the virtual recording studio is because she is a leader whose career journey reads like a masterclass in strategic career evolution. She's gone from traditional big law associate to a CEO of a company and also general counsel of other companies, and then back to the law firm world. And now she is at one of the world's most influential legal technology practices over at Baker McKenzie. But what makes the story truly compelling is not just the trajectory, but it is her career and leadership philosophy behind it. And so we're going to be talking about how she's also giving back to the legal community as an adjunct professor to the next generation of lawyers at Northwestern University Pritzker School of Law. And there is a bonus in this whole story that I can't wait to talk about. Cynthia, welcome so much to the program. We're so glad to have you here.
That was a very generous opening, so thank you for that.
Absolutely. Now, Cynthia, like all of the guests that come on to the BDO Legal Tech Talk podcast, we always do our research. Eric and I, we are scouring the web to learn more information about all of our guests. And just like with you, I found all this great information. I learned about your background, your history, but it was when I went to your LinkedIn profile, Cynthia, my eyebrow raised a little bit because when I looked at it and I saw it, I said, well, wait, I have to go back to the other tab. Is that the same Cynthia Cole? And why did I do that? And I encourage everybody to go ahead and do this, to go over to LinkedIn and take a look at her profile. And you'll see that there is a magnificent photo that looks to be like you are on stage, you're holding a camera and a microphone rather, and it looks obviously like you are singing, which is different from every other photo. So I had to ask you about it. And the story that you told me about the intentionality of putting that photo there as opposed to your very nice corporate headshot, right? It was a very strategic move of yours. And it obviously got me talking to you much more about this. Can you talk to us a little bit about the genesis behind that photograph there?
Happy to, because you're right. I love that picture of myself, which is why it's there. But I joke to my children, I say that picture has to be a part of my celebration of life, right? Who gets an opportunity to do that, right? I mean, for me, there was just so much joy in that entire event and the band and all of it. So what had happened, frankly, it was right before the pandemic, and a new partner had joined my former firm, and he is a guitarist and is a member of bands as well as being a tax attorney, which maybe sound like an oxymoron, but actually incredibly talented musicians in the law, FYI. So he had sent an email to the whole firm, or to everyone in the California offices, and had said, hey, I want to put together a band to play for nonprofits as part of fundraising. I saw the email and I thought, oh my gosh, how cool. I was a singer in high school. I was in the choir and I love to sing and I love music. I come from a very musical family. So that email really resonated with me. And I thought, oh, wow, what a great way to give back. It's a different way to give back to a lot of the organizations I already support in other ways. And so there were fewer people than I anticipated who signed up to join. And so they eventually said, well, why don't you be the lead singer? And I was like, oh, okay. Sure. Because I usually say yes, which occasionally is to my detriment, but I said yes. But I also had this doubt through the entire time, right? We're doing the practices, we're talking about the song set. And eventually, at one of our practices, they put the microphone in front of me and they said, okay, go. And I really truly asked, do you mean like by myself? And it was just, it's so funny because they were like, but you're the lead singer. I mean, I was so afraid. I was so afraid. And I speak on stage and I present and I write and I put myself out there in those ways. But singing to me was something incredibly vulnerable. And it was a much more personal kind of fear that I had. And while all of this is happening, the pandemic happens. And so initially we started with our band and the fundraisers were not live because of the pandemic. So we did music videos. So that was a sort of softer entry into it, into performing and singing. Those were a ton of fun. But then come 2022, we're allowed to actually perform live. We've done these songs over and over again. We've practiced and we're behind stage and we're getting ready to go on stage. And I am shaking with fear. I am so afraid. And the drummer of our band, who's a professional musician, Scott, amazing person and personality and talented musician. And he looks at me and he says, Cynthia, you've got this. Everyone and I'm kind of moved telling this story. He said, everyone in that audience is rooting for you. They want you to kill it. And I was like, oh, okay. I still shook on stage and I was afraid, but him telling me that and me looking at the audience in that way, having that view on the people who were, in fact, dancing and that whole experience, I can't even tell you how fabulous that was. And in full disclosure, the picture where I'm sure that picture was taken was me singing I Fought the Law, which is also a nod to maybe a few things, right, in my life and career, and also the fact that I love the Clash. But so that's the other part. Then we did it again a few months later for a different organization. And I was so much more comfortable and so much more excited. And frankly, it's addictive to do that.
There is a TED Talk somewhere in there, Cynthia, for sure. And the thing that moves me about your story, because it resonates so much with me at a leadership level, it resonates with me because oftentimes our team members don't hear that enough. They don't hear enough that everybody's rooting for you to be successful. Everybody wants you to win. And that is such an inspirational message. And we get caught up in the quagmire of the day to day. We talk so much about e-discovery and case law and AI and all this great stuff. But when it comes down to it, when people have self-doubt, when people don't think that they can rise to the challenge, it's such a great leadership reminder that everybody is rooting for you. Do you see that transforming or manifesting, that story manifesting itself into other aspects of what you do now?
All the time. And you're so right. And I think especially as lawyers, there's so many things in that, right? There's the desire to be perfect and to overthink, right? And the fear paralysis. There is the fact that sometimes not everyone is rooting for you. And sometimes it is you win. In order for you to win, someone else at least feels like they're losing. Lawyers tend to be very competitive. And even for myself, that's a whole other mindset switch that I've really tried to work on in that way, trying to just be generous or more generous in the way that I look at the work I do. But yes, I find myself reminding myself that I need to say that out loud to my team because it's demanding and there's a lot on our plate and we're thinking of a lot of things and we're trying to, move forward really quickly. And I try to build in those opportunities to express that to them, right? That, look, I am rooting for you. We are all rooting for you, and we're a team. We are a team, and we all win together, and it makes a difference.
What a great message. Your career path is a tapestry of awesomeness. It just fascinates me because you went from big law to CEO to general counsel, public companies, and then you chose to go back into big law as a global practice leader. And it resonates with me because I've actually worked in federal agencies, I've worked for advisories, I've worked for tech companies. I've done a lot of different things to kind of round out my life experience in the working world. But really curious how you saw the opportunity to move back into big law. Most people will say that you work in big law and then you go into the corporate world and don't have to be held to the billable. But what drove your decision about moving from the C-suite, then to law, then back to the C-suite, then back to law? How did you kind of navigate that in your career?
Thank you for saying that. I think sometimes my moves were at the time probably made under duress or stress, but there's an art to being able to take what is maybe an unfortunate situation and trying to turn it around at least, which is also something that I talk to my team, my students, or other young attorneys who ask me questions about that in particular. Everyone goes through ups and downs. And so being able to take the downs and at least at some point, maybe not immediately, right, turn them around into something that you can move into a better light or make work for you. But when I was in law school, I always knew I wanted to be a general counsel. And I wasn't exactly sure of the path, but I always had that in mind. So moving into working in companies in-house was always on the path. I just didn't know when necessarily. And I always wanted to work in tech. And so, those were my two guiding, well, and internationally, those were the three things, right? So I had sort of three overarching ambitions, let's say, for my career. So with that in mind, going in-house at whatever role, that sort of made sense was right. And I started out at a software company doing tech transactions and really negotiating and understanding that role, which was instrumental. And I had a great boss. He was a great mentor. He gave me a huge amount of rope and told me, go do it. There isn't anything that you do that we can't undo. So don't worry about it. And if you have a question, you push pause and you come back and you ask me, and that's okay. So with those two instructions, I was like, oh, are you kidding? I can do this. So, but I think going back into big law was definitely a pivot that I had not anticipated for myself. And frankly, neither had my family. They said, oh, are you kidding? Is that really what you want to do? You want to go back? That was in 2016. My role at the time was CEO and general counsel of Spectra 7 Microsystems. And I had taken that company, or the team, I really want to emphasize it was a team effort. We had taken that company through a transition where the CEO passed away suddenly of a heart attack. I was part of the succession planning without knowing it in advance. So we had been through, I would say, a rather traumatic event. And that was tough. I learned a lot. That was another opportunity that presented itself that I'm sure I always wanted to be CEO, and I would never refuse a job again as a CEO, but it wasn't something that I was seeking outwardly. And so I think I wanted something kind of going through that after having been in-house for 13 years. I wanted something different. And I felt like I had always had an interest in privacy. And coming back to Silicon Valley in 2014, I had talked to a number of companies at the time about privacy issues, and they didn't seem very mature, let's say, on a lot of those issues. And so I really saw it going back into a firm as an opportunity to build a practice that I thought the timing was right and that I could create a market for that type of tech transactions, privacy focused practice. And I also felt like even if it didn't work, I would be fine.
So one of the things that I do is I advise clients on trends in technology a lot. Daniel and I have lots of healthy debates about where the legal technology space is actually going. And if you think about the evolution of legal tech, it's usually been like essentially behind the times when it comes to innovative technology, right? Rarely do you see a matter management system on the cutting edge of technology. But with that kind of thought, how do you advise your clients and how do you help people think about the acceptable ways to use technology, or how do you think about ways in which technology needs to be improved, and maybe sometimes you come up with secondary solutions or workarounds, or how do you kind of help clients through the technology questions and traps that a lot of legal tech has?
Generally, my approach is you need to be flexible in how you look at, there are certain, obviously, laws and rules where there is no flexibility, right? But I tend to not be in those areas. I tend to be in the areas where there is a little more room for, let's say, creativity and how we look at issues and how we manage them. I also ultimately am a humanist, right? I was an English major, I was a French minor, I moved to France, and I'm bilingual. I'm very focused on relationships, connection, human connection. So I think that's another point that I make with my clients all the time, is that any tech, legal tech, any tech doesn't run itself. And oftentimes, the biggest mistake I see is bringing on a new technology and then leaving it by itself and not having auditing and human sort of intervention, or even just checking in, regular checking in. That resonates with most of my clients. They know, and I know because I was in house, I know the budget constraints. I understand that oftentimes people are viewing the budget around legal tech as replacing humans. But to me, and I get it, there are some ways where maybe that works. But I think if that's your ultimate goal, then you will fail at doing what you set out to do.
I want to really back into your statement just now. Talk to me about how being a humanist, and I've heard you say this before, and I think it's so fascinating. Maybe define it for us as well. Being a humanist, driving legal technology and innovation, and understanding that, I think, save for the exception of AI or Gen AI, and in more particular, we've generally been years behind. So if we're looking at like a Venn diagram, where's the sweet spot between being a humanist, being a lawyer, and innovation?
I think this answers this question. We had a client come speak to our associates in the office earlier this week, and someone asked him, what is your expectation of your law firms? And especially knowing that the audience was really junior associate, people who are just starting out in practice. What is your expectation with respect to those individuals and the younger members of the team using AI or tech in how we manage your issues and just generally? And again, because of my bias, let's say, I loved his answer, which I won't, of course, be able to repeat exactly, but it was generally along the lines of junior attorneys need to understand the law and they need to build on their own experience. And the way that you get experience is not by asking a question, of a tool and getting an answer. It's by doing the work and the research yourself. So his response was, my expectation is that the junior lawyers on your team are doing the work themselves like they've always done the work. There are certain ways that we shorthand, certain tasks, mundane tasks. I would expect you to be doing that, but I do not expect these tools to be replacing the fundamentals of research and writing and understanding and developing a profound knowledge base and experience. Of course, I loved his answer because I feel the same way. I think that human experience, it's why I have been so fearless in so many of my decisions. I think the experience of making a mistake, of course, it's awful when it happens, but it's that experience that then allows me to be able to talk to clients authentically about, okay, if we experimented in this way, or if we looked at it this way, here's the risk, not from like an idea. It's a risk because I've probably experienced it in some way myself, or it resonates with them because maybe they've done the same thing. In my mind, we cannot shortcut. I think that's what sometimes people are trying to do. Gets back to this notion of perfectionism and risk paralysis ultimately, which sounds like it doesn't make sense, right? Because using legal tech would seem to be risky, but I think that sometimes it comes from a space of thinking that using the tech is less risky ultimately because it takes the human and the human element of vulnerability out of the equation.
Legal teams are struggling to manage resources, maintain compliance, and adopt new technologies. BDO's legal operations team can help. We enhance efficiency, reduce costs, and support compliance so you can run your legal department like a business. Schedule a meeting with us today at bdo.com.
There's a great story about failure. And my dad was he worked for IBM for 26 years, and he would always say stuff like, you learn more from your mistakes. And remember, it's okay to be vulnerable and telling a story around mistakes, because that's how people really latch on. Winning and being successful, people are usually like, great, she won. It's not as relevant as actually, I worked on a project where I had a bunch of files that were hidden in an archive and I couldn't get access because I didn't know the right password. Well, we had to hold off on our final production to the DOJ. And it was a mistake. And I learned, and I never did that thing again. But the thing is that storytelling and that experience, like intelligence is one thing, but I practiced Buddhism for a lot of years. And one of the ideas is to say, in the seeing is the doing. Like you actually visualize your experiences before you actually do them. And once you do that, you actually realize the actual outcome. One of the things that you guys are talking about, the adoption of technology and the acceptable use of technology. And so you're very much involved with AI governance. And there's lots of different changes, not just within privacy, but acceptable use around what AI is. And we're hearing in Texas that it might be prohibited. And all over the place, we're hearing different ways in which people are going to lock it down or actually provide better use cases. But beyond compliance, and there's very much a human aspect to helping people and organizations understand that AI isn't just about tools. It's about people, process, strategy, structure, culture, right? How do you help clients through this? Again, Daniel and I talk about this all the time. We're so focused on the outcome of what these tools can do and the acceleration of insights and all this really amazing stuff. Yet we also are not super contemplative all the time of the acceptable use. So how do you help clients navigate that and what's permissible? And I'm not talking about hallucinogenics and bias. I'm talking about, hey, listen, lawyer, use this tool in this context. Don't use it in that context. So how do you help clients almost develop their own self-discipline around this?
Delicately, because you're right. That is the most difficult piece. And many in-house legal teams know that people are violating the acceptable use policies that they've rolled out. And so you almost ask yourself, like, what's the point? There's a point of diminishing returns. And we talk about these things. And that's part of having a relationship with the clients that goes beyond just asking a question and me giving an answer. It's about providing guidance on these issues in other ways, providing benchmarking. A lot of my work is saying, look, for these other clients, without naming names, for these other clients, we did XYZ, they had these issues. I think this is something that you could use as well, and it would be relevant, or the way that they rolled this out, even visually. This is something we've done with respect to acceptable use or even contracting guidelines, because there's governance, but then there's also what is, like you said, what does this mean in practice? And this whole area, the amount of changes that I have seen in commercial transactions because of the use of these tools, the changes to indemnification, limitation of liability, different aspects of all of these agreements, that has completely changed these agreements that hadn't changed for decades, right? So those are the things that we talk about. And part of it is also approaching the way we get adoption inside the legal team. And there has to be a part of experimenting. So one, experimenting with the tools, experimenting, getting, asking, what are you susceptible to use? What do you like? And then addressing it that way. And then I think it's also being able to pivot quickly. Clients have gotten much better at this, and they should. You should be demanding of your outside counsel that they're providing you a regular cadence of updates. To me, that's the nuts and bolts of having a sustainable practice, is being able to, not just when the client is asking you questions, but are you regularly checking in with them and saying, hey, I saw this thing and this looks interesting. What do you think about this? Or, because oftentimes if one client is having an issue, everyone is having the same issue, right? But they just aren't able to knowledge share. I don't think there's an easy answer. And I think that it's a question of finding what is the most important, really defining and going back and defining it again in a few months, and not being static on that point, but it's defining, what are we trying to solve for? What is the risk, right? And then going back to that over and over and over again, because sometimes we get lost on a trail. Creating a pause, going back and asking over and over again, what are we really trying to solve for? What is the biggest risk here that we need to address? And that has to be the fundamental, and the rest of it, we can more or less let it go.
This goes beyond lawyering, Cynthia, right? This concept is really deeply embedded with this overall theme that you're talking about how you are a humanist. Eric and I talk about this idea as well. We talked about other guests that have come onto the program too, about this idea of, you have to know, like you said, what is the problem you're solving for? I feel like fundamentally, when there is an increase in pressure to apply technology for the sake of applying technology, we go out and we procure software. It is no different in the e-discovery world, the data privacy world, and frankly, when everyone realized that the iPhone was a serious enterprise function, right? That mobile phone was the way to go. All of a sudden, that became, hey, well, this is going to solve a problem. But did we really define what was wrong with the other mobile phone that we had for the enterprise, right? No, we didn't. It was just ego got in the way, to your point, and we go out and procure software. And now all of a sudden, the total cost of ownership, or the TCO, for those that know the acronym, all of a sudden the TCO is blown out of proportion, because now you have implementation and training that was unexpected. You have to go out and re-implement and retrain. And it's very hard to pause when the corporation, the organization, the firm says, here's what I need you to do, go. And then the train's moving at 1,000 miles per hour. Cynthia, how do you pause? It's something that we all struggle with. Every listener has struggled with it at some point. How do you push pause long enough to be able to reassess, hey, are we really solving for the problem that we started with here?
That is such a good question, because it's really difficult. Because oftentimes, if we say, there are different ways to do it. You can ask questions. You can ask more questions. You can say, hey, can we take a look at this from another? But that may be viewed poorly. So how do you put yourself in a position in the first place where, when you say that, whoever you're saying that to takes it as a good thing and trusts that you're not doing that to stall, right? You're doing it because you have a good reason to do it. And I think so much of that goes back to building those relationships, understanding who you need to be building the relationships with. This is something I talk to my team about as well, is that, and it sounds really stupid, but hello, how much energy do you spend trying to please people who, in fact, have actually no impact on whether you make a difference or ultimately what you're trying to do gets across the line? And so I think from a personal perspective, being able to answer those questions in your life, right? But in your job in particular is key, because then you can really focus on building the relationships that matter inside the organization, so that when you ask the questions and well, first of all, one, so that you're getting all of the information that you need. Because sometimes I talk to clients, they don't even have all the information. So we're operating with maybe a third of the information that we really need. So we're out on a limb. One is putting yourself in a position where you're really getting the full information from the people who are making those decisions, building those relationships. And then also, I think building into those relationships the cadence of questions, right? So that it's not like you just always say yes, 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 yes. And then all of a sudden you have a question or you want to create a pause and they're not used to that behavior from you. I don't know if that makes sense. I think it's a part of how you set expectations of yourself. I mean, meaning I guess the expectations that people have of you and what they would assume, you would be asking. And I just think there are a lot of different ways to do that. It's not always easy. You're not always in a position to do that. I mean, I get that. But if those are the things you have as you are building, and sometimes you have no choice and you just have to do it. And it just is what it is. And you take the information you've got and you say yes, and you go, okay, and you cross your fingers. And sometimes that's what you have to do if in the short term, in order to, in the longer term, be able to have that opportunity. So I think there it's also perspective. I think the other thing that I see often with less experienced attorneys, frankly, sometimes with more experienced attorneys, is the inability to see that risk is scalable, right? Not every risk has the same impact. And you need to be able to very quickly assess, not every issue is of equal weight or equal problem or equal benefit. So being able to do that analysis and to be able to quickly isolate, okay, here's a list of 10 potential problems, but there's only 2 that really matter. So the rest of them, we're going to put those aside and we're going to focus on those 2. And so what's the quickest way to get to a yes? And that's not easy. And that's a learned skill. And that kind of goes back to, frankly, my client's point, that I mentioned earlier, which is that's the kind of, I think, learned experience that you have to live through.
Yeah, this is so great. One of the things that, I always struggle with is, we've all worked for big companies, and you have this management by objectives, and you build these big plans, and you have a roadmap, and you have a vision, and every quarter somebody comes out and says, here's how we're doing, here's how we're not, there's alignment, and here's the next 4 initiatives. And I think a lot of people, again, back to the comfort zone idea, a lot of people are just, great, we have a plan, it's a vision. And then when you have something like with AI, you need to change that vision all the time. You need to be able to flex quickly. And I think one of the things that's coming to our culture is like Kaizen on steroids, like continuous improvement on steroids. And I want to understand something from you, because you've been in super senior roles your whole career. How do you create a real, honest feedback loop for people who are going to say to you, boy, Cynthia, she's changing her tune every other day. It's a new set of objectives. Why did they kill that project? I really want to understand how we as a corporate culture, law firms, corporations, are going to be able to address this breaking free of a comfort zone that has been since the 50s. Like, come to work, be a company person, bring your lunch pail, go to the water cooler. That's over. All those days are gone. So how are you helping not just your clients, but your colleagues and the junior folks understand that, hey, change is not just constant. It's everywhere in all dimensions. How do you kind of keep people sane?
The only way I know how, which is being authentic and transparent. And I think we talked about this earlier, talking about vulnerability, being open to say, guys, I'm not actually sure what this means. What do you think? What does this look like to you? You can change your mind, but I think your principles and the way that you operate and the way that you build relationships and make connections, that needs to be consistent. Because it's that consistency that then gives you credibility when you say, uh-oh, we need to change. We need to pivot. This was the wrong direction, or I took another look at this. And I think that's where the human connection and the relationship building goes into that. And I think that as a lawyer, again, this was a very well-known, just extremely talented general counsel friend of mine said about the general counsel role. And she had said, in a different context, and she had said, the general counsel is the conscience of the company. And I think that means something different. That doesn't get applied across the board in the same way in every company. It doesn't mean the same thing to every individual. But I do think that you can absolutely be moving forward with all kinds of interesting, creative, innovative ways of doing things or bringing tech on board and still be principles focused and focused on understanding that you do need to be the one who maybe raises an issue that no one else in the room wants to raise because that is your role.
There are these key elements that I'm hearing you say throughout this interview that has just been so great. And I've highlighted here on my pad too. Things such as, being a humanist, experimentation, vulnerability, authenticity. One of the things that is not being said, which is it's implicit through what you're saying, is a concept that author Amy Edmondson made very popular, which is called psychological safety, in particular, psychological safety at work. And so Amy Edmondson, it's a great book, by the way, people should definitely pick it up. Inside of the law firm world, it's not something that's often really discussed. And the reason why I bring it up is because it's hard to be vulnerable inside of a law firm. It's hard to be authentic inside of a law firm. I'm making generalizations, I understand. It's hard to be a humanist inside of a law firm. But when you create the culture that creates this fertile ground for growing and blossoming attorneys who believe in what you believe in, and you are in the perfect role to spread that across and to germinate that across globally, that's amazing to me. And I think that everyone should replay this episode 5 times at least, right? To listen to the words that you are saying, because one of the words also that I'd love for you to explore with us here is curiosity. You talk about this. I've read it in what you have done. And curiosity, I think, is the last element that makes you who you are. I would love for you to talk to us about what does curiosity mean to you in the context of running a law firm and all the other words that we just mentioned.
Yeah, curiosity, I think, means a couple different things. I think one, it is being curious about yourself and self-awareness. And I think it also means being curious about other people. I don't think that I have ever been a selfish person, just, generally. But I will say that I have gone through a number of very personal, in the last, let's say, decade, 7, 8 years, very, very personal, very, very, very difficult moments or years, frankly. And that actually, while extremely painful, and I've heard people talk about how pain is ultimately a gift. And I don't think everyone always gets there, and maybe because the pain was too difficult. So I certainly don't mean this in a way to criticize, but for myself, being able to, one, be curious about that pain, just on a personal level, but then has also made me more curious fundamentally about other people and about where other people are coming to, or how they are approaching issues and questions, and how this applies in my work is that it has ultimately, I think, given me a more generous posture, because I think curiosity is generosity, of asking questions to understand the other viewpoint in a way that where you are genuinely open and receptive to the answer without judgment.
It's very much about active listening and not looking for the answer that best suits your preconceived notion of the outcome. It's a very humanistic thing to think about, right? When we really talk about like my intended outcome, we think about starting with the outcome that we desire. But wait a minute, things change. You got to continuously improve. You have to be willing to be curious and adapt to a way that might not suit the intended outcome that you started out with. Cynthia Cole, this was just awesome. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Legal Tech Talk. Until next time, keep innovating, keep learning, and keep believing that the people want to see you succeed. Love it. Take care.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on BDO's Legal Tech Talk podcast.
If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe for more episodes.
On BDO.com, you'll find all of our episodes, transcripts, and ways to continue the conversation.
Until next time, this has been another episode of BDO's Legal Tech Talk.